I volunteered to give a talk on this series about Sangharakshita's teachings, his distinctive teachings, and after a bit of thought, what I came up with is to talk about what a scheme which was originally presented in the 1970s or possibly 80s called as the system of meditation, which is a 5-stage system of meditation. But over the years, it's been broadened out to cover pretty much the whole of the spiritual life, looking at it from 5 different perspectives, which have a meditational aspect, but which actually relate to many other ways in which we can practice the Dharma. So this is the scheme I'm going to be talking about today. It's a 5-fold scheme, so I'm going to only be able to give about 5 minutes per stage, which absolutely is not going to give justice to anything I'm going to be talking about today. So in a way, this is more like just an advert. It's like an advert for this particular scheme, and in particular, an advert for the course called The Journey and the Guide, which is a course over a number of weeks where Mike Joban, who's written this book, Journey and the Guide, where he goes into these different elements of the path in much more detail. So I'm just being an advert for that course, so that wasn't billed as well why I'm doing this talk. And just to briefly summarize the different stages of the path, we could call it 5 great stages of the path, 5 dimensions of spiritual discipline. I'm not quite sure exactly what it's called now, but those mix those words up in some order, and you'll get something about how it's talked about in these days. So we have 5 stages, and I'll have to describe what's meant by them, because if you're not familiar with the scheme, then the titles are not immediately apparent what they actually refer to. So we have integration, positive emotion, spiritual receptivity, spiritual death, and spiritual rebirth. So they're all a little bit metaphorical. So I'll need to say something about each of these things. I'm going to take a fair bit of my cue from Subhuti, who gave some very good talks, 7 or 8 talks on this particular these different topics, but also I'll be calling on my own experience as well to see what I've made of these particular stages of the path in my own Dharma life. Yeah, so if it ends up that this topic interests you, then maybe you'd like to do the Journey and the Guide course. And I was just thinking, well, why is this an interesting scheme for me? What has that brought to me? And why do I find it interesting? Well, it's certainly one way of gaining a bit of clarity about what's going on. It's sort of, although it's not the end of the story, it gives you a bit of a handle about different elements of the path. So that's been very, very helpful, maybe understanding what's been going on in my own life to a greater degree. And I think one thing that's also emphasized to me is that I think that certainly early on, I thought the Dharma life was all about gaining insight. That was the most important thing. And this is saying, no, there's quite a lot more to it than that. You got to fight, at least fight, well, in this particular scheme, 5 stages of the path. So it's given a bit, I think it gave me a useful corrective to me to not think in so black and white terms about the Dharma, about gaining profound insight. So I'm going to have to try and give 5 minutes per stage. So I'm going to have to be very, very good with the clock on this, otherwise we won't have a good chance to have a discussion. My aim is to have 15 or 20 minutes of discussion in groups towards the end of the session. So my 5 minutes on integration starts now. Integration. So this sounds a bit psychological. So I'll try and make it a little bit more meaningful and a bit more appealing. And we can talk. Subhuti has spoken very well about this, and he talks about integration in terms of acknowledging the different aspects of ourselves and taking responsibility for them. So for this to happen, for this to be matured, and we need to know ourselves in quite a broad way. We need to know the different aspects of ourselves, be familiar with them, acknowledge them, and take responsibility for them. And if we're properly integrated, so all the different parts of ourselves aren't pulling in different directions, pulling us apart, they're more like cooperating with each other. And if these different parts of ourselves cooperate, then we don't experience big inner conflict. So it's in a way, what's going on is that if we become more integrated, we don't have anything like as much inner conflict as before, so that our energy can flow in a kind of a coherent direction. And Subhuti talks about having a sense of flow in our life. But for this to happen, for our life to be centered around our main purpose, we need to have an organizing principle around which our life can be integrated. And we might call this organizing principle going for refuge, or the three jewels, something like that. So something around which our life can integrate. And if we can be more integrated, we can be wholehearted in our actions, which is, of course, what we really want. We enjoy activities, we're fulfilled by them when our energy naturally flows in that direction. And in doing so, our life gains a sense of meaning and fulfillment. So again, this is something which we really want. We want fulfillment. And when our life has meaning and our life naturally flows in certain directions, we will get substantially some things we deeply desire from our life. And one thing which is very good, the way Subhuti talked about, he talked in terms of us taking full responsibility for our moral agency, or taking possession of our will. So we get to really understand clearly and use our will in a constructive way, in the sense of being skillful. Now, we can only really see our agency very clearly when we are mindful. So when we're mindful, a gap opens up. You could say a gap of choice, or at least it seems like that. So something happens, and then we want to do something about it. If we're not mindful, there's no real gap of choice. We just respond in a habitual way. We got no other choice if we're unmindful. But if we're mindful, we have this period of choice opens up, and then we can see that we clearly appear to have a choice in the matter. So our sense of agency starts to become more clear to us. So mindfulness is a very important aspect of integration. In terms of meditation, mindfulness of breathing is regarded as probably the main meditational tool for cultivating this integration and cultivating a sense of our moral agency by opening up a space of mindfulness in which we have choice. But the mindfulness of breathing isn't the only way in which we can cultivate integration. There's many other things like communicating with others, working with them. This is also vital in the integration process, because we only really know what we're like when we're well, it's important to know what we're like in relationship to others. On our own, we know ourselves to some degree, but when other people are around, we relate to them. We can see much more about what we're like. So communicating and being in relationship with others is vital in integration. But also on the other side, solitude is an important integration tool as well, as we start to have maybe deep encounter with certain aspects of ourselves, which might be difficult to encounter in the same way when other people are around. So that's vital. So solitary retreats would be a good example of encouraging an integrating process, particularly if we can get on well in a solitary retreat. Ethical practice and confession is another tool, and seeing the required steps you need to take to overcome certain unskillful tendencies. is another way of becoming more integrated. It's encouraging our energies to flow in a skillful direction. And similarly, reflection on the law of karma is a way in which we can become more integrated. It helps us to take more full responsibility for our life as we see more clearly that actions have consequences. So reflection on the law of karma will help us to understand more clearly that we have moral agency, and that we there are consequences of our actions for ourselves and other people. And also creating a life context which is supportive of integration and our life purpose. So we would do well to assess our work, our home life, our social life, friendships, hobbies and passions, and cultural life, so that they can become a reasonably fitting channel for our sense of meaning and purpose. Yeah, move on. Positive emotion. So positive emotions. So these are going to include the traditional Brahma Viharas, metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, which is sympathetic joy, and upekkha, which is kind of an equanimity, and shraddha, which is like confidence and trust in the Dharma, confidence in the path, and confidence in our ability to practice the path. But also we might include less inverted commas desirable positive emotions like shame, remorse, and disgust, which is going to be helpful in our spiritual development at times. And similarly, delighting in things that bring us delight. Delighting in the mystery of things, for example, and delighting in certain aspects of the Dharma. And we might also include here positive emotions in terms of seeing difficulties as opportunities, not just as bad things which rather weren't there. Now, this is an important thing I just sort of saw more clearly the other day, particularly it came up in Subhuti's talk, is that, okay, positive emotions have some value in themselves, but they only find their deeper meaning in affecting how we behave. So positive emotions motivate or impel us to act more skillfully and to refrain from more unskillful actions. And with positive emotion, we're better placed to create positive karma, whatever that is, positive karma for ourselves through skillful thought, word, and deed. So speaking simply, we could say that if with the positive emotion of mudita, that helps us to become more kind. The positive emotion of mudita, which is a sympathetic joy, that'll help us to rejoice in the good qualities of others and in others' good fortune. Shraddha, the confidence and trust in the Dharma, if we're in contact with that'll help us to go for refuge to the three jewels. And shame, remorse, and disgust will help us to refrain from unskillfulness. And delight in the Dharma is going to help promote our enthusiasm and commitment to the Dharma. So I think we can see here that positive emotion can have a very profound effect on basically what we do with our life. So it's, although positive emotions is valuable in itself, it finds its deeper meaning in the way that it affects our response to life. And just saying a bit about how my practice, or practice in relation to positive emotion, has unfolded. When I first came across an approach to the metta bhavana, which was something like the Who Hates the Metta Bhavana course, that absolutely transformed my practice, at least meditation practice, in relation to metta. It was from the first time I started doing it in that way, it really transformed my commitment to cultivating metta in a way that I wasn't in touch with before. And puja is a very important one for me as well, in terms of creating positive emotion. It's as if in puja we can really contact, if we can engage with it, our sense of confidence and trust in the Dharma. in a way, we forging a relationship with the beyond, you could say, something like that. And then when I was working in Windhorse evolution, there was a very strong practice of rejoicing the merits of others, particularly on their birthdays. And I found that a really good way of contacting a sense of joy. Well, just hearing the good qualities of others is just a very, very joyful thing to do, and to partake of that oneself. So that helped me contact positive emotion, sympathetic joy. And also spiritual friendship is a very important one for connecting to positive emotions, particularly, I think, loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy. And but also when engaging with good Dharma discussion with friends, that can be really good at just drawing out one's enthusiasm, one's confidence and trust in the Dharma. Anyway, it comes more to life sometimes when you talk about the Dharma with other people. About 5. Then spiritual receptivity. I really like this one. I could talk for hours. Well, I'm not going to have the opportunity to talk for hours on spiritual receptivity, but this is one which particularly resonates with me. The spiritual receptivity, we could talk here in terms of being receptive to what is of spiritual value. And in terms of meditation, in Triratna, this quality is particularly thought of as being cultivated well in the practice of just sitting, where we don't try and do anything at all, really. At least that's where we're headed towards doing that. So we're just very receptive to our experience, receptive to what's going on. And I would also say that puja has been very important for me in this respect, as being receptive to influences, you could say, in some senses, beyond oneself. And Subhuti, when he was talking about this, he was talking about in quite an interesting way, and I thought this was really, really helpful. And he spoke in terms of cultivating this receptivity in relation to noticing what we respond powerfully to, what actually draws our energy forward. And the language he uses is something like noticing where the erotic charge is in our life. So he's using slightly provocative language, but using the language of eroticism or eros. I think it captures quite well how we're naturally strongly drawn to certain things. It sort of draws our energies in quite a powerful way, in a way that what we might normally regard as erotic does, but in a more refined way. So this is talking about things that really give us delight, and to understand ourselves more clearly, we might do really well and also help our spiritual receptivity if we can just understand more clearly what is it that just draws our delight, what captures our erotic charge, you could say. It may be football, it may be nature, it may be just going to the seaside, seeing the sea, maybe it's people, maybe it's pieces of music, maybe it's works of art. But what's important is that we're sort of drawn by these things, and we contact kind of something like a sense of meaning, which isn't just to be found in the object itself. It sort of points beyond itself. This is one of the things I'll be inviting you to talk about in groups, is what really draws this kind of strong attraction to us, whether it's something to do with the Dharma or whether it's nothing to do with the Dharma at all. Yes, so just noticing what actually draws this strong attraction. So when it comes to the Dharma, what is it that what sort of draws this strong attraction? Maybe it's the metabhavana, possibly our well-wishing sometimes is very powerfully felt. They might have a charge to it. It may be communicating with friends. Maybe we bring certain friends to mind, and there's a strong charge to our response. maybe a particular theme. For me, meditation's always been like this. It's has a strong, I think we could even say an erotic charge, as a strong motive force for me in meditation. Maybe some people are also like that as well. But a friend of mine, Archie, who's off to get ordained very soon, I think for him, the Dharmic passion, this kind of charge related to ethical things. So the motivation practices of Dharma are strongly related to the desire to be ethical. Somehow ethics pointed beyond his own practice of it. It pointed to the beyond, because pointed way beyond itself. It sort of drew energy from him. No, so I was just reflecting on some other things which might point to the importance of spiritual receptivity. So I've noticed on a few occasions when I've been on retreat, and I've really respected and valued the retreat leaders, sometimes have just said something, and I've been really affected by it in a very, very positive way. So without spiritual receptivity, being really open to what has spiritual value, that wouldn't happen. And there's a teaching called the 3 levels of wisdom, and one of the levels is gaining wisdom through hearing or reading. And of course, we need to be receptive, spiritually receptive, for that to happen, for us to gain wisdom through hearing. And Shraddha is perhaps the most vital spiritual emotional quality, because without that, we cannot go for refuge to the 3 jewels. We need to have this Shraddha. Sangharakshita talked in terms of Shraddha as being a response from what is ultimate in us to what is ultimate in the universe. And without spiritual receptivity, there will be no Shraddha, and there will be no going for refuge. So in a way, there will be no Buddha's path. And we could go further and say that without Shraddha, there is no wisdom, because you could think of Shraddha as being a precursor of wisdom. It's a necessary prerequisite for wisdom to arise. So we need receptivity for Shraddha to arise, and then we could say, therefore, we need spiritual receptivity for wisdom to arise. And other people have different, going from a slightly different topic, other people have different views to our own, different perspectives, different upbringings, but they will have some spiritual truth in their experience and in their understanding of their experience. And if we're spiritually receptive, we can pick up on that and think, oh, I never thought of that. My life's not been like that. Yeah, I can see that maybe from your perspective, that would seem to be a very reasonable interpretation, or anyway, sort of seeing that the spiritual truth and what other people have to say, it's not only us who have truth. We've got a tiny bit of it, and nobody's got the whole story. But if we can be receptive to what others have to say, we can appreciate the truth in its greater fullness and breadth. And if we're receptive, we can respond to people's noble qualities and not just relate to them based on prejudice or preference. So so if we can be open to people's qualities, we can sort of even befriend them in a way which goes beyond maybe initial preference or prejudice. So it's very important to be receptive to the spiritual qualities, the noble qualities of other people. So moving on now to spiritual death. So may sound a bit challenging, and in some ways is a bit challenging, more than a bit. So what this is talking about is kind of a dying of the old self, so that a new self can be born, which is the next stage, spiritual rebirth. So in a way, what's being talked about here is kind of a dying of the old self. And this can happen if one experiences the way things really are, even if just for a brief time. And this involves a letting go of clinging to our assumed self, to our current self, you could say. So letting go is required for this spiritual death to happen. And I'll say a little bit about how this is manifested in my life. And but one important one, and challenging one, is realizing that you're not immortal. And I mean, really, really, really realizing it, not just thinking it, but somehow the message gets through. And this has happened on a number of occasions for me. So that was quite powerful, well, quite difficult. But nevertheless, it's a step forward because we're getting over this initial view of self that we're actually eternal. We are immortal, just like the gods. Pure rubbish, but I'm sorry to say it, guys, but we actually believe that. Part of us definitely believes that. That's part of the nature of our attachment to self, is believing that we have this immortal self. And when that gets truly challenged, it's a spiritual death of thoughts, but very positive, but quite challenging. And I remember going on a retreat, it was about 11 years ago, and it'd been sort of going in quite an interesting way. And one morning, it was as if, I think I was lying meditating in bed, and it was as if my life had finished. It was really like my life was over. Something had happened, and it was seriously challenging. And it was like, it really was it wasn't my best understanding, it was a spiritual death of sorts, because it was as if my life had ended. It really was really, very difficult. But I remember then just walking around the Rivendell retreat centre, chanting a mantra. And a few hours later, I was much, much better. But something quite interesting and difficult had happened. And it was definitely in the nature of some sort of spiritual death. And one thing I've also noticed in spiritual death, sort of I'm giving a bit of a bad press, and unhelpful press for spiritual death. It's unnecessary, but it can be difficult for a while. Sometimes when things have happened in my own spiritual life, I get obsessed by death for a little while until I realise that's what's going on. So it seems that my mind can confuse spiritual death with physical death. Part of me is a bit dumb. So it seems like for me, this metaphor of spiritual death is quite an important one, quite a useful one. It does seem possible for my mind to conflate the two in some unhelpful way, and it's started to realise that when something in the nature of spiritual death has happened, I will get a bit preoccupied with physical death in a very unhelpful way. Until I've realised what's going on, then things are a great deal better. So in pre-Ratness, spiritual death is related to one way we can sort of cultivate it is through doing practices which are called insight practices. Might be meditation on the three lakshanas, and there's a method you get introduced to around the time of ordination, which is 6 element practices. So these are encouraging us to start to see at least conceptual understandings of the way things are, at least pointing, we're sort of taking on board ways of looking which sort of point to the way things are. And this can help us to become a bit more familiar with this kind of territory. And these kind of meditation practices will, in a way, sort of one might think about sort of plough the ground for I'm not doing very well here, but it's we'll set the scene, if you like, by doing these kind of insight practices for spiritual death. But these experiences, which are ultimately experiences of selflessness, we can't bring them into being through an act of will. It's much more like they occur as an act of grace from the transcendental, something like that. It's probably a more helpful way of thinking about it than that we actually bring it into being. We can cultivate our mind so it's more likely. And Sangharakshita spoke in terms of making ourselves a lightning conductor, so that we can be struck by lightning, the lightning of reality, which will be some form of spiritual death. Then the final part of this scheme is spiritual rebirth. So this, in a way, follows on straight after, following on from spiritual death. So once the old self has been let go of to some degree, a new self can start to be reborn. And spiritual rebirth processes are sometimes spoken in terms of processes called Dharma Nirma processes, which can happen when self-clinging has been let go of for a while. They're a natural follow-on from a spiritual death. So I can't really do this justice in a few minutes because it may be going to slightly more esoteric territory than maybe some of us are familiar with. I'm just trying to give a little bit of an idea of it. To encourage these kind of processes to occur, it's vital that we cultivate the imagination. It's something we can very helpfully do. And what the way Sangharakshita and Receptivity have been talking about it, they have been talking in terms of relating to what they call a transcendental object, which is their own terminology. Basically something, maybe a figure, but often a figure, which seems to point beyond. It points beyond the self. It points to the true possibilities of spiritual life, you could say. And this connects to the main meditation practice in Triratna, which is regarded as a spiritual rebirth practice, is sadhana practice, which is a visualization practice. So when you get ordained in Triratna, quite often, or almost universally, you get kind of an initiation into the meditation practice on a mythic figure. Maybe it's a green tar, or maybe it's an Avalokiteshvara. And in a way, this is kind of an off-the-shelf transcendental object, which can point beyond itself. And it's this connecting to this object which seems to point beyond itself, which contains, you could say, qualities of awakening. And it's these qualities of awakening which start to become more present once the old self has been let go of and the new self starts to form. But we won't really respond to what you might call a transcendental object unless the imagination has started to become reasonably active, at least in some ways. Yeah, so we do need to cultivate the imagination for spiritual rebirth to happen more readily. So I think that's all I'm going to say. So the question I'm going to ask you to explore, you'll have mostly 20 minutes to explore it, is looking at where is this erotic charge in our life? What are we strongly attracted towards? Whether that's in more mundane matters, and it's important to understand in terms of self-understanding, what are we really attracted to? Where is this eros in relation to certain aspects, important aspects of our life? And also, where does it manifest in relation to the Dharma? Are there certain aspects of the Dharma life, the Buddha Dharma or the Sangha, which really capture this sense of strong attraction? Just to give you a start of 10, for me, it's music. Music, also three things: music, cooking, and golf. These are the three things which I can say strongly draw my attraction. So they're all fair game in your discussions. So getting to understand where our attraction is really drawn, where is our eros, and where is it in relation to the Dharma life. And these things, they are very pertinent to both spiritual receptivity and spiritual rebirth. I haven't got time to go into all the five, but I'm just encouraging you to talk about things which will help at least two of the five which I've been talking about. So we've got most of 20 minutes.
Sorry, could you just say something more about why music, cooking, and golf? Like, it's not why, but it's like I could talk about stuff like that, but how does that relate to the Dharma path? Like, or what is your, maybe it's like, is there something as well that's in your Dharma life that also gives that?
So what I was thinking in terms of is that these things which strongly attract us, they tend to point beyond themselves. So, for example, in relation to I've got a strong attraction to golf. It's something about the beauty and power of physical movement, sort of heading in that direction. In terms of cooking, it's something to do with creating an enhanced sense of harmony around the dinner table, like providing something which is going to facilitate like a positive experience, a harmonious experience. Something pointing to something about a higher beauty. It's pointing beyond itself to something even more beautiful than the music itself, something like that. So I think what it seems to me is that these things can really point beyond themselves, and in a way that's what we're looking for in the Dharma life, things that really point beyond themselves in a constructive way.